My name's Jack, so if you got any questions, holler, hey Jack. If you've got anything to add, please do that too, or whatever. I'm more than happy to talk about discussions of different things that you know already about history and so forth. It sounds like you're from around here, so you may be able to kind of add things. If you want to play Stump the Interpreter, do that. See if you can give me a question I can't answer, and if I can't answer it, I'll tell you a lie. So anyway, we'll start with early Missouri, very early Missouri. That's what this is about. This is Native Americans, Indian tribes that were here. The primary Indian tribe here was the Osage. They were pretty much located south of the Missouri River, but not totally. They were kind of broken into a couple groups, the Little Osage or the Big or Great Osage. That's not who we get our name from. The first Europeans that were here, Marquette and Joliet, ran into the Missouri Indians. If you take Missouri, add an A on the back of it. That was the name of that Indian tribe. That's who they first met and how we got our name and so forth.
So it is Missouri.
Yeah, really.
Well,
Missouri.
it's kind of, yeah, if you say it as a word, yeah, yeah. But anyway, by the time we're becoming a state, though, they've been pretty much decimated by European diseases, wars with other Indian tribes. They were kind of integrated with the Little Osage by then or whatever. So anyway, that's where we get our name, but the Osage were the primary Indians. What were they like? Were they farmer-gatherers? Were they warriors? Did they travel and hunt? Do long hunts? Did all of the above to some degree. They didn't live like in teepees. They lived in more permanent structures like bent wood and thatch and so forth on it. So they had a little more permanent structures. And they did go on long hunts, especially for buffalo. There were some buffalo, bison in Missouri, but they would go on long hunts. But they were a little more stationary than the nomadic tribes of the things further west. So anyway, that's our primary tribe. There's other tribes running around, Oto, Iowa, Kansas, and from the north, Sauk and Fox came down from like Wisconsin, Illinois, and so forth, or whatever. Were the Osage fairly warlike? Yes. They didn't get along with other tribes real good sometimes, so there were battles with other tribes and so forth. But anyway, that's our primary Indian tribe. By the time we became a state, through different treaties, not good for them so much, had been pretty much moved out of the state. So the time period we're really talking about here, many of them had been gone, moved into Kansas or Oklahoma, something like that. So those are the first people here. Second people are the Europeans. They're going to show up here, and Marquette and Joliet were the first group that came here, gave the name of the river, Missouri. They were really looking for a water route to the Pacific Ocean, which everybody was looking for at the time. They got past Missouri down in Arkansas and realized, nope, we're not getting anywhere. We're going to end up in the Gulf of Mexico. So they turned around and went back. That was like 1572, 73. Okay, so anyway, shortly after that, LaSalle, they were French Canadian, came down, and he floated the entire Mississippi and claimed the entire Mississippi River basin for France. So that's why we have many of the French influences that we have. The basin includes the rivers that flow into it. Well, there's two primary rivers that do that, the Ohio all the way up to here, the Missouri all the way up into Montana. So 1684, this is all French territory. Not many folks around. There's not many people settling or whatever. They will eventually start filtering in. St. Genevieve, of course, is usually considered the oldest town in Missouri, and it's like 1730 something or whatever. We're also getting some French influences from the south. That's to make St. Louis or whatever. Laclede comes up and builds St. Louis, really. It's 1764 is when St. Louis was settled or whatever. 1769 was Louis Blanchette. And he founded St.Charles. So we were founded by a French Canadian or whatever. Actually, the Lacledes were Creoles. But that's what this building sort of projects here, vertical logs. So when you go to St. Genevieve, I'm sure you may have well been there. They have vertical logs. I don't know that I really know why. In theory, I guess they ought to drain better or something. But for some reason, the French built like vertical logs instead of horizontal logs. But those are our original influences. But we have some other influences. Come forward to 1763, the French and Indian War had gone on primarily between France and England. But France had been aligned with the Spanish, and France is going to lose pretty much all of North America. They're going to lose all of this, they're going to lose Canada, and so forth or whatever, except for a few islands down here. So what they did was they ceded everything west of the Mississippi to Spain, so we became Spanish territory here. Again, not a ton of influence. They didn't even send somebody up to rule us for about 6 years or whatever. We didn't get a Spanish representative. But 1763, we become Spanish territory. None of this lasts real long. First of all, after the French and Indian War, everything east of the Mississippi becomes English territory. And of course, in 1776, we pick a fight with them. We said, we think we ought to take this back. So anyway, we win the Revolutionary War, 1783. Everything east of the Mississippi becomes American territory finally, but we're still Spanish territory. And there are many people starting to come here. Daniel Boone, the most famous one probably, came here in the late 1700s, but it was Spanish territory, still French influences, especially in St. Louis, the Choteaus, the Lacledes, and all them. The influences were primarily French still or whatever. Okay, again, short periods of time, go to 1800, Napoleon, another Frenchman's in power, he wants it back. So there is a secret treaty, San Ildefonso, and in 1800, we, in theory, technically become French territory again. But nobody seems to know it because we're still ruled by Spanish people or whatever the heck. So anyway, we're French territory, kind of. And so, anyway, we come forward then to 1803, and of course, this has become American territory, and they're worried about the Port of New Orleans. Jefferson has been elected president. He's worried about the Port of New Orleans, them closing off that port, because most of the goods from the western United States, which at that time was Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, are coming down the Mississippi River, leaving through the Port of New Orleans. And so he sends James Monroe over with $6 million to buy New Orleans. Says, why don't you buy New Orleans? Napoleon says, yeah, I'm going to get in another big fight with the English or whatever the heck. I need a lot more money, so I'll give you a better deal. For $15 million, I'll give you the whole thing. Okay, so everything there. So it kind of broke all the constitutional rules and all that. They said, well, that's too good a deal, we'll do it. So anyway, for basically 3 cents an acre, Louisiana Purchase became American territory. And finally, where we are here becomes American territory. So then after we did that, we said, what the heck did we just buy? And they sent these two guys out to figure that out. That's Lewis and Clark to go up here and again look for a water route to the Pacific Ocean. Finally gave up on that somewhere up in the Bitterroots up here in the northern Rockies. They said it's not going to connect completely or whatever the heck. But anyway, sent them out and said, go figure out what the heck we just bought. And so we like to claim that from St. Charles. They did. This was really kind of the last settlement they were at before they went west. Now, you know, we could say, well, that's where it started, the thing. Well, people in Pittsburgh said it started there because that's where they built the Keelboat. But anyway, they were in St. Louis, 1803 for winter, and over in Wood River, close to St. Louis. Spent the winter there. But they left in May, took a couple days, got up here. Lewis had gone to St. Louis, caught up with them here. So they were here in St. Charles for 3 days. And then they left from here. After that, there's actually a journal in one of Clark's, or an entry in one of Clark's journals, that they had met some people in La Charrette, which is really Marthasville today. There's only a couple buildings there then at the time. Really wasn't much there. Daniel Boone's daughter lived there. But he says those were the last white people they saw until they came back, except for some trappers, and some trappers and so forth. But this was really the last settlement until they got back 2 years later. So that's all the stuff we like to claim in St. Charles here. This depicts a little bit about slavery. We're going to talk a lot more about that when we get into the building or whatever. We're going to talk politics, we might as well talk it in a political place. But anyway, the bigger deal here, it talks about slavery. Here are many people, because we're never Confederate states, did not think we had slavery. We definitely had slavery. We had a large slave population. When we applied for statehood, we had 66,000 people, we had 11,000 slaves. So slavery was fairly prevalent. Why was that? Many of the people, the time periods we're talking about, we are the West. There is no Kansas City, there is no Denver, there is no Salt Lake City or whatever. When you get to California, you're going to run into people of European descent, Spanish or whatever. But we are the West, and this is where the movement was by the 1820s or whatever. So we applied for statehood and wanted to become a slave state, and then we'll come back and talk about that or whatever. Primarily because of one of the things, these are free states. That's the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which said slavery had to not exist above that line or whatever. And the line, though, stopped at the Mississippi River, so we were a big argument. We'll talk about that over there.
What was Arkansas at that time?
Arkansas was always slavery.
It was slavery?
Arkansas's always been slavery or whatever. Now, of course, this extends into Oklahoma. That all happened way later. Oklahoma didn't even become a state until 1900, I think, somewhere around there.
Was that line the Mason-Dixon line?
No.
No?
The technical Mason-Dixon line is the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania. They were surveyed by 2 surveyors, one Mason, one Dixon.
That's why it's
from
straight
England.
there, huh?
Yeah, and they surveyed the line, because there was a big argument. That was held off during the Revolutionary War, and then they came and formed the line that actually became, there was a big argument between Maryland and Pennsylvania where it was, and then Delaware was included too. So it actually swoops down here, but that's the technical Mason-Dixon line, but everybody called that here. After that, it became the Ohio River. This was the surveyed line, this was the Ohio River. And all of that is considered the Mason-Dixon line, but the technical one
So it
was
stopped
2
at
guys
the-
named Mason and Dixon.
Stopped at the Mississippi?
Yeah, it stops at the Mississippi. We'll talk about why there were a big argument because of that, because we said, well, we're gonna fight over slavery. Well, you got a line, you're above, where all those things are. No, you're not. It stops at the Mississippi, so your line's no good anymore.
I wonder when they named the Ohio River.
I don't know that. Now you played some interpreter and I don't know that. When it was the Ohio River. But these things depict a little bit about slavery here. Some people said it might not have been so bad. We really didn't have that much of the plantation thing, where you had hundreds of slaves almost. But many families had 2 or 3 slaves, something like that. Actually, the Pecks rented some slaves, the people that built the building. We'll talk about that over there too. We were only the capital for 5 years. The capital from 1821 to 1826. Why is that? Well, when we wrote the Constitution, we'd been given approval to become a state in 1820, after a 2-year argument. But anyway, we wrote the Constitution and said the capital of Missouri must be on the Missouri River, which we are, but within 40 miles of the mouth of the Osage River, which is where Jefferson City is. But Jefferson City didn't exist, okay? So they had to build Jefferson City to be the capital. It was always meant to be the capital. And so anyway, but they needed a temporary capital or whatever. About 9 cities applied for that, St. Charles being one of them. St. Louis gets mad twice in this process, because they didn't get picked for the permanent capital. They had been the territorial capital, and they didn't get picked for the permanent capital. Why? I don't know, multiple reasons. Far eastern part of the state, so they got further to go and travel's very slow. Probably that French influence had a lot more to do with that, because you had the kind of the in-place French influence, Choteau's, Cleves and all that. The people coming here are not French, they're of English descent, they're from the south. So they weren't necessarily getting along so great, or maybe they did, but anyway, I think they tried to get away from some of that established French influence. So they said, we'll put it in the center of the state, and everybody's got equal access to the thing. So that's what they built it, but they needed a temporary place. 9 cities applied: St. Louis, St. Charles, St. Genevieve, Florissant, Potosi. They kind of wanted 3 things. One, you had to be on a major river. We are. Number 2, you had to have some access to roads, which we have. The Boones Lake Trail we'll talk about outside or whatever. And had to have a place for 70 or 80 people to meet or whatever, which is funny because that seated most of the legislature then. Our legislature is way bigger than that now. But anyway, so we had the 3 things they wanted, and then we said, well, you know, if you come here, we'll give you free rent. So, didn't have to pay their $2 a day for rent or whatever.
Question, it says here that it costs the average person $800 to $1,200 to properly outfit a trek to the far west.
Yeah.
And they said to ask you how much that would be today.
I hate that question.
I know,
never
Jack,
answer.
Jack,
Yeah,
24,000.
24,000.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I gotta embed that in my brain. 24.
She just made that up.
Right here.
Yeah, that's what he's saying, I think we give him the point anyway.
Yeah, I think he gets a point.
I was
He
gonna
didn't
say,
have an answer. He just had the answer. Oh,
I was gonna say nothing.
of course you would, Ed.
I was going.
Yeah. After you read about it, then you're like, I understand how you operate. Oh, sorry, Chuck.
Shoes.
Uh-oh. Stability? Oh,
They got the stations or whatever. Yeah. No, I can't do that either.
Capitol building. It was built in 1818 by the Peck brothers, Charles and Rudolph Peck. They'd come from Vermont. They built it, the purpose was for a store, which we're going to see, residents where they lived. And the upstairs was always meant to be a room they could rent out for money of some kind or whatever. There were Masonic lodges. I guess you could have a wedding, but I think everybody probably got married in their house or something like that. But they could rent it out for whatever. So the center section is the Peck Brothers building. That one over there is old, but it's modern inside. And actually, one of the maintenance guys is down there now is going to move in there or something, but it's modern over there. The other building is connected in a row-style architecture, federal architecture, was for a man named Chauncey Shepard. He was a carpenter, built furniture really or whatever. So that was his building, and they're connected on the other side. Now part of the thing is this looked like the back of the building. Well, it was really more the front of the building at the time because of the river. People would have come by river much more than by road or whatever. There weren't that many roads or whatever. So anyway, this belonged to the Peck brothers. They really weren't here that long. Rudolph Peck died in 1827. Charles Peck left in 1829 or whatever, and it was built in 1818. So the Pecks were really only here for, probably, I guess it's about 10 years or something like that, 9, 10 years. So the buildings then went through many, many changes. I've looked at the ledger for the things that own. There's like 30 different things that own pieces of this building. It was broken into sections. The walkways were enclosed. There was a bus company in here. There were apartments in here. Come forward to 1860. This was the old part of town, and this was pretty much a rundown building or whatever. Some discussion about tearing it all down. It's 1960. We wanted to tear down old stuff and make a nice round building out of something. But because of its historic value or whatever, people here petitioned the state to keep it. So they went along with that. They made us a state historic site, part of the state park system. That's why we're always taking our shirts. And then went through a renovation to take it back to what it was. Because if you look at pictures, the earliest pictures we have are from the 1870s, and many things have changed by that time. Balconies, sidewalks, and so forth. So it kind of got taken apart piece by piece and put back together. So anyway, 1971, it took them 11 years to get the process working. But we opened as a state historic site. We think it's very close to what it looked like when the Capitol was here. as best they could interpret.
The wood gutters are interesting. Were they always wood gutters?
Yeah, we
when
think
they-
so or whatever,
when
but
it
if you
was Capitol?
yeah, if you look at them, well, you can't see it, but we cheat. There's metal ones inside. We cheat. Like this thing, everybody says, "Wow, how old is that?" This is only about 8 years old.
Is there anything here that was original?
Oh yeah, lots. They say 70% material. And so forth. Roof line has been changed, but that's what it looked like. 70% of the materials, most of it is the actual masonry. The bricks and the stone were all original building materials that they used or whatever. Built by people, slavery probably, there were slave owners working inside. There is, and I can't stand up. It's got a dirt floor. When the Capitol was here, well, the closest it came in modern times was 93, which was the big flood. That was sandbagged, where the cabin is, was sandbagged. But it never really got up here, and that was the biggest that we know about. There's some evidence that maybe it flooded or whatever. But when the Capitol was here, the actual natural river ran to our fence line. It was actually up to this fence line. The river was much wider and shallower. Multiple things going on during this period. Movement of people of European descent across the continent. The Industrial Revolution is happening. Machinery is going to start doing all kinds of things, including travel. Steamboats. Steamboats happen. Many places the river was too shallow or whatever. Like where I-70 goes over, their speculation was only about 3 feet deep at the time we were here. Well, they had to do something, so they started to build wing dams, things that would funnel the river to a narrower but deeper channel, which moved it that direction. And then when this was completed, and all of it, because not only was this being talked about, they were talking about taking away all the buildings on Main Street to make them more modern. Everybody said, no, let's do what it's become. And when they did that, the city decided we wanted a park over there. Our property technically does go to the river, but we say we'll loan it to the city. That's a city park over there. But they built the park, and when they did that, they did dredge up some of the river too to make it a little more land over there than what it was. But when the Capitol was here, it was in by the 1870s and 80s, the Katy Railroad was being built. And of course, that's across the street there, so it had receded for that. So anyway, lots of people are coming here. Lots of people are heading out Boone's Lake Trail. Does anybody know about Boone's Lake? No? Okay. Daniel Boone and his family came here late 1700s, 1798, 99 or whatever. And his youngest son, Nathan, which is where he actually lived, the end of his life. But anyway, he and one of his brother-in-laws was out trapping in the center of the state, and they found a stream of salt there. It's very valuable. Use it to tan hides, preserve meat. So they started to run a salt mining operation, which was really not digging. They just dipped the water out of the stream, boiled the water away, and what you have left is salt. They actually sold a lot of that salt across the street where Lewis and Clark's restaurant is now. It wasn't that, there were different buildings there, but it actually was floated down the river in big casks, and they could sell it over there or whatever. But the Boone brothers ran it, Daniel Morgan Boone and Nathan Boone, and anything with salt, they called them salt lakes. So it was Boone's Salt Lake. Well, the road to get there was the Boone's Lake Trail. Some historians say the most important westward migration route immediately after the War of 1812 was the Boone's Lake Trail. It's going to be far surpassed by the Oregon Trail, California Trail, Santa Fe Trail, but people weren't going that far in the 1820s. They were going to Boone's Lake because Missouri was a great place to go to. And this is where I get everybody from Kansas, man. I said, in 1820, why do you want to go to Kansas? I said, there's nothing out there. I said, there's no trees, you can't build a house or whatever. You got gnarly grass that you can't use a plow in. There's nothing out there. Why'd you want to go there? And there was some truth there, whatever. So when you look at that migration route, it passed over all of that. Then you get to the mountains. Well, who wants to live on a mountain in 1830? So eventually they're going to get out to California and Oregon. Oregon is where they were headed because California was Spanish and Mexican. But anyway, so they kind of passed over all that. So when railroads happened, you could bring in all the things you needed and kind of backfill in Kansas and Nebraska. So anyway, but Missouri was a great place to go. Lots of forests, lots of water, lots of stuff, lots of people coming here. So in the 1820s, this was the place to come. It was here. And many people were going out to the Boonslick area because there were multiple salt things out there. It was on the river, on the Missouri River and so forth. It's still a state historic site out there. There's no people there. There's a bunch of signs. And you can walk around where the salt is still, the stream is still there. But it's another state historic site.
What city is that close by?
Boonville would be the closest one that you know about. There's actually a Boonville, and if it was in Kentucky, which is even a little lower, but Boonville is what you'd be closest to. So, anyway, Beck Brothers were going by the late 1820s, went through a lot of things or whatever. So unless you got questions about it. Oh, the cabin, we talked about that for a couple of folks over there. When they built the park, they wanted restrooms in there, so they brought this. This is actually came from Hillsborough. It is from the period or whatever, and it's a typical dog trot cabin. Gets its name because dogs would trot through the center. They'd actually lay there. It's their air conditioning to lay in the center of that thing because it creates a little bit of a breezeway. So that's where it got its name or whatever, and that's a typical cabin for especially eastern Missouri that have them. If you go out to the Boone Village, there's 2 or 3 of them out there that are like that, with that center open. And you could keep cooking and heat in one side.
It's still restrooms now?
There are still restrooms, but they're broke. They've been broke for about 6 years, 5 years. They built new ones across the street, so the park doesn't need them anymore. They broke, we said we're not going to fix them. We keep thinking we're going to make some historic representation there.
Because that was moved here.
That was moved here. That was moved here from Hillsborough. But it is from the period.
How long ago? How long has it
When
been
this
here?
was all done, 1980s is when that would have been brought here. When they did the park. The park was done in the 1980s, and that's when they did it. I mean, there's tile in there. What it really is full of junk. But the exterior is a typical example of a Boonslick tavern. Well, I want to make it a Boonslick tavern because they had to have taverns along the Boonslick Trail or whatever that you could spend the night. So I think we ought to do that. But so far, nobody's sending us whatever $100,000, a couple $100,000 to renovate it. Actually, some of the logs are really starting to deteriorate, but it needs renovation. So it's just full of junk right now. But it is authentic. It appears. So, and then we grow vegetables and stuff in the gardens from the period. A lot of them are vegetables. We have
Takes care of the garden.
well, there's a garden society that does some, and some of our maintenance people do some of that
Not
too,
your
or whatever.
job.
The foundations are remnants of buildings from the period. We don't know what the buildings were. Could have been ice houses, smoke houses. Row of Pickwood blacksmith work, could have been blacksmith shop. But they are the lower parts of them when they did because they did an archaeological dig out here when we redid the building. And they do date them to the period. So we think there were buildings there, same way with remnants to a cistern and a well. Source of water, all of them kind of crummy. This is shallow groundwater, so not so good. The well, cistern's better, but it's whatever runs off the roof. Or you can go to the river. So why don't you go to the river? The river's always been big enough.
Yeah.
Said it was too thin to plow and too thick to drink.
So where did they get their drinking water?
You boiled it some way. And actually what they really did was make alcohol out of it. Yeah. But yeah, you strain it as best you could, boil away all the bad stuff. Just lubricate. But they did brew a lot of alcohol. So,
You wonder what was there.
pardon?
Makes you wonder what was there at one time.
Again, the remnants of what they well, then, actually, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what this was before the Peck brothers built the building. It could be just space, an empty lot. This is one of the older buildings on the street. There's some down there, a couple that are older, but this is older than many buildings. All right, let's head upstairs. We're going to run out of time here.
Kind of freaking.
Go down.
This was the House of Representatives. We had 43 representatives, and that was the Senate. We have 14 senators, and before we leave, we're going to go to the governor's office, which is in the Shepherd's Building. A striking thing for me, for all of this, is sheer size and numbers or whatever. Number one, the population in the state was a total of 66,000 people, 11,000 slaves, 55,000 free. St. Charles alone has 50,000 people. So if you take St. Charles and say, now you got the whole state, you got a lot of room out there. And then comparison, go to Jefferson City and look at the Capitol building now, and say, this room, and that room comprise, and not even that one, I didn't even include that, that's the governor's thing. It's unbelievable, you know, the size of things or whatever, and all the things that have increased drastically. So, what boils down to is a lot less people or whatever, but they could still argue with each other, and that's what we were. We were a big argument whether we could be admitted to the Union or whatever. We applied in 1818, took us 3 years to get in. But we had a large slave population, and we wanted to keep that slave population. The NAR says, okay, you can become a state, but you can't have slaves. So again, it started a big argument. And they said, well, your line, that Mason-Dixon line, stops in Mississippi, so that's not a line that you can use anymore. So again, long argument or whatever. Some attempts at compromise. A guy named Talmadge came up with the things and said, okay, you can keep the slaves that you have, but you can't bring any new slaves to the state of Missouri. And any slave born in the state of Missouri would become free at age 25. So eventually, over multiple generations, slavery would have disappeared or whatever. And it applied not just to Missouri, but everything in the Louisiana Purchase territory, which included, well, huge amounts of territory or whatever. So, again, that's from the side, the northern side or whatever. That was their outlook or whatever. The southern side is the absolute opposite. We got this vast new territory. We want to put slavery into that territory. So they argued for 2 years and tried to come up with some compromises. But finally came up with the most famous one, which is the Missouri Compromise. Missouri Compromise was the second of 4 compromises that really put off the Civil War for about, I guess, 70-something years. The first one was the original Constitution of the whole country or whatever. They wanted to stop slavery then, and they said there's no way we're going to form the original United States without leaving slavery in. We're the second or whatever. Third was the Compromise of 1850, which admitted California was divided by a line we'll talk about in a second or whatever. And then the last one was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which started a border war between Missouri and Kansas, because that said you could vote whether you could have slaves or not. And Missourians illegally crossed into Kansas and voted for slavery. So anyway, that was later. That's the 1850s. The time period we're talking about is 1820, the Missouri Compromise. Henry Clay, the great compromiser from Kentucky, is given credit for it. And it did 2 basic things. In addition to the spread of slavery into the West or whatever, they were worried about the balance of power in the Senate, because you get equal representation in the Senate, and at the time there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. Maine wanted to be admitted as a state. They wanted to be a free state. So the compromise admitted Maine as the 23rd state, as a free state, and then Missouri as the 24th state, as a slave state. They set a new boundary that slavery could not exist above. This time it's not geographic like the river. It's geometric. It's latitude 3630. It's our southern border. And for the rest of the Louisiana Purchase territory, slavery could not exist in territories north of that line, with one exception, Missouri. We were the last slave state above that line. And again, that lasted until, actually, there never were slave states above that. Arkansas came in, Texas at the time was Mexican. So that's out of the thing. Oklahoma wasn't a state there. So it really kind of left Arkansas and a little bit of, Louisiana had come in actually earlier than that, but there was no argument over that. So anyway, so we got a solution pretty much. So we wrote our Constitution, but in that we said no free people of color, black or mulatto, could come to the state of Missouri. So again, North says, no, can't do that. So they argued another 9 months, came up with the second Missouri Compromise. It's also called the Solemn Public Act. It's pretty hokey, it's pretty political, because they said Missouri could leave that clause in their Constitution, but Missouri would publicly solemnly swear we'll never enforce it. Don't trust us, we won't try to enforce it. So that's what we did. They were sick of arguing after 3 years. So finally, on August 10th of 1821, we were admitted as a state by him, that's James Monroe. He's our 5th president. Last of the colonial presidents, as I say. Last of the Virginia dynasty. 4 of our first 5 presidents are from Virginia. But anyway, he signed us into statehood on August 10th of 1821. So, anyway, and we were a border state all throughout the whole dispute. During the Civil War, sent as many regiments to the south as they did to the north. But there was a big influx of German people in particular, late 1830s and 40s. A guy named Duden came to, actually pretty much to wine country out there, Augusta area, and raved about Dachau and that, and how great a country it was, just like the Rhineland in Prussia or Germany at the time. And they were having a civil war then, and they said go to Missouri, and it's a great place. So many Germans came here in the 1840s, and they were very anti-slavery. So that pretty much split the state. But it was an ugly place to be, because you didn't know who you were talking to, what side they were on, or anything else during the Civil War. So anyway.
So did the governor live here, or where did he live?
He would stay here. His brother owned a house here. I think I've heard he had property here, but he would stay with people. There was a hotel down here, and supposedly he would stay there and eat there anyway. But again, you got to look at how much they're here too. They were only here during, the legislatures were only here during sessions of Congress. First of all, we only had to have a session every 2 years. So for the 6 years we were here, there was only 3 sessions. Now, we had 2 special sessions, regular sessions, 3 or 4 months. We had 2 special sessions that were only a few weeks long. But if you add it all together, we hate to admit this, they were really only here probably a year and a half in the whole period they were here. Now, the governor was probably here definitely more than that, but he would travel back and forth between, I mean, he owned property in St. Louis. He would travel back to here or whatever. So legislatures were here in the wintertime 3 times, and that's primarily what they
Do they already have taxes? And how did they fund building this Capitol and the one in Jeff City?
It would be closest to what we have as property taxes. You were taxed on things you owned.
When
Animals, furniture.
when it became a state, or
Yeah,
when
right
was
away.
it
They needed a way to collect taxes or whatever. They were setting up some toll roads. You could have tolls on rivers and things like that. But property taxes, or something like property taxes, would have been the most similar. There's no income tax for sure. And so that was their primary source of income. And it was up to different counties to do things. That was some of the things I love the specifications for the roads. They had to have roads built, like the Boonslick Road or whatever. And it had to be at least 2 wagon widths wide and no stumps over 18 inches.
No stumps.
Over 18 inches? That's like a lot. So you dodged them or you had a wagon high enough to get over them. And it was up to the counties that it went through to maintain them, and it said it led to widespread dissatisfaction because you had to work on the road. But anyway, so those are some of the early rules or whatever. What they do here, most of it was boring. You had to figure out how to collect money. You had to decide whether you were going to build roads or you're going to try and railroads were going to happen 30 years later, but not yet. Railroads were happening east by then, but there's no way they did that. But, you know, again, how do you collect money and what do you do with it or whatever. They did pass one thing that stands out, though, and they outlawed dueling. So you can no longer call somebody a stupid jerk and go shoot each other. And then they ignored it because there's evidence of a lot of duels after that. It was considered murder if you killed somebody in a duel. But they never enforced it. I mean, famous people, you know, like, look at our money. Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel.
Can you repeat that bad word?
Oh, you mean.
What was the bad word? That you couldn't say call somebody?
Oh, no, I don't know what the word was. You call them a stupid jerk or anything to insult them or whatever. Because they would. I mean, they get in big arguments. There were guys that challenged each other here. You know, they get in big arguments over some topic and they say, that's the dumbest idea you ever had. Nobody's too stupid to even put that out there. That could be enough to get challenged. And, but again, it's hard to imagine, you know, we kind of make a joke of it, but again, our money, Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel. Andrew Jackson killed a guy in a duel. Our first senator, Thomas Hart Benton, killed a guy in a duel. This guy, Henry Geyer, who's the Speaker of the House, he killed a guy in a duel. And so, you know, it was, we did have the regular legislatures come here a couple of years ago. They came and, you know, do a tour and mass. It was full of the real legislatures. And one of them did stand up and say, well, it is one way we can settle our arguments. But the wildest story I heard was one guy, because it was a gentlemanly way to settle a dispute, which is pretty bad. But anyway, one guy was nearsighted. So normally you went 10 paces apart and then turned around and they shot at each other. But because he was nearsighted, he couldn't see very well. So the gentlemanly thing to do was to go only 5 paces instead of 10. They did, they killed each other.
Oh my gosh.
And so, it's wild, but it is one way to settle an argument. So, anyway, that's what we did. Capitol was here till 1826, off it went, and the buildings just went through all series of things.
This is all the Franklin stuff?
Okay, so we just crossed over in the Chauncey Shepherd building. This is the governor's office, and these are the 4 governors that we had. This is our first governor, Alexander McNair. William Clark had been our acting territorial governor. Most people thought he would be the regular governor, but he wasn't that much of a politician. He didn't campaign that much. Plus, Clark's wife had been sick. He had taken her back to Virginia or whatever, where they were from. And so anyway, he was a better politician, campaigned more, and won fairly easily. He also represented, again, that more the people that were coming here rather than the people that were here. Clark was kind of associated with that French influence or whatever. He's coming here, he's from Pennsylvania is where he was from. So he served a regular term. Originally, you could not succeed yourself. You could only serve 1 term. So then we had our next election, and then Frederick Bates was elected. He was our second governor. He'd been multiple different titles up to then or whatever. He's our second governor. He only lived 9 months. He got pleurisy and died. So if you've ever been out to Faust Park in West County, Thornhill, that's where he's buried. That's his house or whatever. So he was our second governor. And then it should have automatically gone to our lieutenant governor. His name was Benjamin Graves. He had already quit. Actually, he was given a good thing to quit for. He was appointed one of the commissioners to establish the Santa Fe Trail. So they needed commissioners to do that. He, along with like George Sibley, whose wife started Lindenwood University, was another one of them. So he wanted to establish the Santa Fe Trail. So then we had to have somebody else that then went to the president, pro tem of the Senate. There was Abraham Williams, and he's the only governor of Missouri we have no picture of anywhere. So we have a silhouette of him, because everybody else had their picture painted by somebody. There's no photography. But he didn't really want to do it either. He says, I'll do it till you have a special election. And then we had a special election, and then John Miller was elected. That's his picture over there. He's the fourth governor, whatever. He actually became very popular, or fairly popular, because he had finished the term for somebody else. He could run again in 1828. He's the only governor of Missouri that's ever run unopposed. I guess people thought they were happy enough, but he's the only one that's ever run unopposed. But he ran again and became governor for another 4 years, and then became a House of Representatives or whatever. So he was popular. But those are our four governors. This is their office. Some people think the furniture was fairly elegant for the frontier. I guess it is. Depends on how much money you had. You could have some pretty elegant stuff. You had money. And different things. He had his personalized bit to it there. The gun-looking thing is a fire starter. It works like a flintlock gun, but it doesn't have a stone in it right now. But when you pull the trigger, it hits the stone against the steel. You put a piece of char cloth under in that chamber there. It'll catch the spark. You blow on the spark, it turns into a flame. So, I don't know if it's a technical thing. It's a concept. But I don't know if that's technical.
Beautiful thing.
Okay, this is the primary reason they built the building, Peck Brothers. And the story here is the economy. The economy's bad. Panic of 1819 is going on. Too much printing of paper money. It's all going to sound familiar. And too much borrowing and so forth. So a lot of bartering. That's really what most of purchasing was to barter. Or credit. You know, even you look at the major companies like the Rocky Mountain Fur Company and stuff, they'd outfit to go up to the mountains and trade for the beaver pelts. They never paid any money. They just used credit, took it all up there, got their beaver pelts, brought it back, paid for it with beaver pelts, and then made some money along with it. But they didn't walk in and say, here's $100,000 for all the stuff I'm going to take. They just took it on credit. And the same way in stores, a lot of it was credit. But you took anything of value. If you grew things, corn, wheat, whatever the heck, you could trade for anything. The bigger thing, of course, the primary thing was the beaver skin. That's what this is. They were $3 to $6, depending upon how good they were. And that's because of hats. They made hats out of them. Other people had talked about that already, but that was their primary value.
That's a beaver?
This is a beaver. And they've got like a sort of a unique characteristic to the underlying hair follicles that you can make a material like felt. You can shape it into a shape with the process, and then it will hold that shape. So the big thing is, for like a regular hat, you can get a brim on it to keep the rain out of your face, the sun out of your eyes. You know, like Hollywood says Daniel Boone wore one of these on his head. That's a bunch of baloney. You know, Daniel Boone hated him. He says they're useless. Doesn't keep the rain out of your face, the sun out of your eyes. And then, of course, you can make yourself fancy by having a top hat or whatever. So you could do that. So that's what these were worth. 1700s, I've heard we shipped as many as 6 million beaver skins to Europe or whatever.
Why do most beaver hats look black? That's not black.
I don't know, but if you look at
Because
the
if
one...
you shave all that down, does it become black?
No, and I don't, there's like a 35-step process to treat the stuff and could have turned it black. But there's a sample of one in the museum underneath the arch, and it's about this color.
Oh, okay.
So, not sure. Maybe they just had darker beavers or whatever.
Have they even sold,
Pardon?
what tiny little?
Yeah, those are ermines or whatever. This is a weasel, and this is a ermine or whatever the heck. And then, of course, there's an old saying associated with this. The process to make the hat, okay, uses mercury nitrates, like a 35-step process. Mercury nitrate is a poison to your nervous system. If you work with it enough, it makes you goofy, you become mad as a hatter.
That's cool.
The other ones look like fur, but that beaver one looks like a lady's fake fur.
Yeah,
Like it's so shiny and conditioned, or
Is this the beaver? What are they?
that's the beaver. This is a deer, you know, and some of the other sayings, the male deer is a buck, they were worth $1. So that's where the bucks come from. This is beaver, that's red fox, gray fox, raccoon, badger,
Oh, badger.
skunk, mink, weasel, ermine.
Yeah, we always thought mink was more valuable than.
It was at the time, yes, much more so. And then,
because the animals.
well, this is, that's a bobcat, river otter, and muskrat or whatever. Relative things, muskrat was worth maybe 70 cents. Those were $3 to $6.
No mink.
Makes right
No
there.
mink.
Well, that's a mink, yeah, there's a mink. Yeah, that's a
skunk?
mink.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's,
So where's the squirrel?
squirrels, now you eat them.
Yeah, you're right. Those are rabbits.
Why don't we have this one over so we know what it is? Huh?
Yeah, that's a bobcat.
You know, I see that now, but.
But anyway,
Coyotes?
some of the old sayings too, like this is a rifle from the time, there were really three components to it. You got the lock, which is where your powder goes into that actually ignites the powder in the barrel. The stock, which is the wooden part in the barrel. So if you got the whole thing, you got it lock, stock, and barrel.
Oh.
And sometimes when you shoot it, the powder in the pan goes off, but it doesn't ignite the powder in the barrel. So if that's happened, you're nothing but a flash in the pan.
Oh.
How come there's such a long?
Those are my bad jokes for that.
No more old man jokes.
No more old bad
She has a
jokes.
question, why is the barrel so long?
Accuracy, and if you, first of all, the military rifles were shorter than that because they're easier to load. You get, if you look at reenactments of the original things, they would line up with a whole bunch of people. And typically the front line would kneel down. And they'd all get in sync and they'd shoot. Well, it took them too long. It's not like guns where you go boom, 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 boom. You got one shot. So there'd be a line behind them and they'd trade lines. The next line would stand up and do it. But even at that, you had to reload your gun as a military guy as fast as you could. They said supposedly if you were really good at it, you could load your rifle 3 times a minute. So that's putting powder in the barrel, jamming it down with a patch, putting the ball in there, and ramming it down, putting powder in here, pull it back and shoot it. That's a bunch to do in 20 seconds. So, but this has a tighter barrel and there's rifling in there. Swirls, it makes the ball spin as it comes out and it's tight and it's much more accurate for a lot longer distance. The military rifles were only accurate for 20, 30 yards, something like that. So that's why they had to walk up close to each other and blow each other up. But anyway, this was much more of a hunting rifle and called originally Pennsylvania long
That's a
rifle.
big
then
trap for a
Kentucky
big
rifle.
What would that trap be used for? What would the trap be?
There?
That trap is like a bear trap, yeah. There's a medium one. Yeah, there's like for wolves and things like that or whatever. The beaver traps are hanging on the ceiling up there. So that would be a beaver trap. All right, and then just stuff you could get at a store at the time. They did as much as they could on their own, like tallow soap they would have made on their own, tallow candles, they would have done that on their own. But they're not so good. They burn fast, pop, spit, stink, all that stuff. But they're free. This is a brick of beeswax, which you can make beeswax candles, which are a lot better candle. They burn slower, cleaner, brighter, but may or may not have stuff. Chewing tobacco, almost all men chew tobacco. You can either, well, you chew it, spit in a spit tube. If you wanted to reuse it, you could let it dry out and then put it in a pipe and smoke it. So you got to use it twice. So life was a little tougher. As fourth graders, what that is, and they'll almost always tell you it's a Nike symbol. It's really a scale for heavy items. Those are the counterweights for it. That's the scale everybody's more familiar with, but it's the weight thing. So anyway, this is the way the Peck brothers made their money. So unless you got questions, let's head over to their residence. Residents, Charles and Ruloff, when they first came here, they were both bachelors, but that didn't last long. Ruloff was married, Charles would have moved out. He and his wife Adeline had 3 children before long. One of them was challenged, some kind of Down syndrome or something like that, I'm not sure what it was. But they rented 2 slave children to help them with the different things. So that does put 6 people in here, 7 people. And this is the whole house. It's not a room, it's the whole thing. Or whatever. So there's your dining room, and there's your living room, and there's your bedroom.
Is this the buffalo cover?
That's buffalo. So anyway, and why is that? Well, the only source of heat you've got is this, and it got just as cold then as it does now. And if it goes out in the middle of the night, it gets pretty cold in here.
Yeah.
So a nice heavy bison or buffalo blanket is what you need to keep you good and warm. So the story here is just work. You know, you get up, work all day. You want clothes, you take your cotton or your wool or your whatever and you card it, and then you put it on the spinning wheel and turn it into thread. Put the thread into a loom to make cloth, and cut the cloth and make a shirt.
Whole different world.
So-
It's like my grandpa's chair.
Yeah. There you go. But anyway, in space conservation manner, so this is a table. It's also a chair. Now, there's a good probable urban myth, probably a good story and a bunch of baloney. But you were taxed. First part was true. You were taxed on things that you owned. You know, the whole closet thing with things that you didn't have rooms that were closets or whatever because you were taxed on some of that. But you were taxed on things. Tables could be used for gaming to make money. So when the tax collector's showing up, make sure you put that up. And he says, that's a table? No, it's a chair. It's cheaper. Now, if you believe that, it's whatever, because that's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
But it's a good story. So anyway, many of the things in here are from the period, not necessarily unique to anything. You know, you've probably seen them. Reflection oven over here, you put your meat in the center, turn it, there's a hand crank over here. Different things. Anybody know what this is? That's your question. Toaster, you got it. You put your bread in there, get it close, get that side done, you kick it around, and you toast the other side.
Yeah. Pretty clever.
So, who says they didn't have modern stuff, right? Just different things. Pesto, grind up your herbs and spices.
So they were the builders of these 3 houses.
The Packs, you know, we don't know how much they actually did. There were other people involved. We really think there was slave labor involved with building these buildings. But we don't know how much they actually, whether they just said, well, this is my drawings, you guys do it, or whatever. I don't know.
Maybe you funded it.
What was this? This thing, yeah. Oh, back here.
That's a Betty lamp.
Oh, yeah. We should know that.
Oh, what?
A Betty lamp from home ec.
No, I've never heard
I don't know
of
what that is.
How did that work?
My understanding,
You light a little candle in the front.
yeah, you put animal fat in there and it gets a wick, okay? So it's like a candle when you light it, okay? The wick would hang up in here and stuff. But you could walk around with it. I shouldn't be handling this thing, but you can walk around with it. I heard, now this was kind of not verified by a woman from England. We get people from other parts of the world. But the story I was told that maids in England were called Betties. And at the end of the night, it was their job to go around from room to room to room to make sure everything was proper and the way it was supposed to be. And they would carry these kind of lamps with them. And that's the story I heard. Now, I said that to somebody from England, and they said, well, I don't know if I've ever heard this story. Okay, well, I'll keep telling them, and unless somebody knows I'm lying or whatever, I don't know.
It's actually
But
part
that's
of
the
the home economics history.
Okay,
You never heard that?
No.
Oh, okay.
yeah. But anyway, technically, I think the technical name is correct.
Yeah, I think so. It's a
The
considered
lumber
history.
that was used, was it local?
Go-
The lumber that was used in construction at that time?
Yeah, like some of the stuff, some of these beams were supposed to be black walnut, which we really don't have here anymore, but it was really sturdy lumber or whatever the heck. And so, I don't know, some of these beams are recreation.
And of course, hand hewn, you can see how they're
Yeah,
hand hewn.
yeah. And again, the ones that they recreated, they did that, obviously, to make it whatever. But the plaster walls and all that, I think are all well. The lab underneath is just strips of wood. It's not, not, well, much later, metal lab. But lab is just all those 1-inch strips together and put the
You couldn't
plaster.
get too close to the fire with the toaster because it would be hot. But I
Because
see,
there's no flames in this part.
No, it reflects the heat from the fire. It's a tin.
Reflects-
It's basically
It was like a
made of
fire
tin.
screen.
yeah.
And it reflects the heat from the fire. It takes, at different times, we got one we can demonstrate. And we've cooked like a chicken on it, and it's really good and juicy, but it takes a long time.
The rotisserie.
Yeah, and that's hand rotisserie, you gotta crank it.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't do it continuously, you kind of let it go, and then you turn a little bit, and turn a little bit.
That's what this is.
I like ice cream.
Yeah,
Homemade ice cream, your turn.
This is a candle safe over here, because your candles are animal fat, so if you're not using them, you gotta put them away.
Right.
Or something will eat them. Maybe bugs primarily, but if you got a dog, of course, the kid says, oh, yeah, the dog's in me. I said, no, dogs were outside 200 years
My
ago.
grandmother had a churn like that. She made it into a lamp.
So, what else can I tell you? The beds, of course, are, the old saying is sleep tight, because that's your ropes underneath or your box springs. These are all things I'm sure you're familiar with, but you gotta use, that's a bed key there. You use it to tighten the ropes up. It's just a way to put it in there, twist it, and tighten your ropes up. And so that's the sleep tight, and the bed bugs, of course, were mattresses or just big sacks full of something. Anything soft, flax, hay, straw, feathers if you were lucky, but probably bugs.
Corner cabinets out.
Good night,
Corner
sleep
cabinets.
tight was from the,
Yeah, sleep tight, because as you lay on these things, they'll stretch.
yeah.
And that's why you had to tighten them up. Because if you don't, you start sagging through. So you have to periodically go around and tighten them up. I mean, you just walk around, hold them as you go. When you get back to all the way around, this thing's a lot longer. But it's just, the ropes will stretch.
It probably had a trundle under it too.
Yeah, that one's got one underneath the trundle.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. And, they said, where the kids sleep on the floor. I don't know. A lot of that's speculation. They didn't sit down and write how they did absolutely everything. So, who knows?
As soon as my son brings home.
So, I'm out of lies to tell you. You got any questions, fire away. Comments, questions, fire away.
So is that an apartment above us, or what's above us?
We're right underneath the Senate right now.
Senate.
Remember, we were in the House of Representatives, we're right below the Senate now.
Okay.
But again, that was just when the legislature was here, which was really only a fifth of the time or so. Just a room they could rent out for whatever the heck they could get money for.
If you stand here, you can see the isinglass in that cabinet.
And people ask about the panes in the windows of the original.
Isinglass.
They're recreations, so that's, the rippling
See?
is all recreation.
Yeah, it's not real smooth.
Because again, these buildings were, if you looked at, well, there is, if you go back into the main building, if you look up, there's banners hanging there, and there is a picture of the buildings in 1960. And they're drastically different than what they look like now. So, this is what we think it looked like when the picture here. All right, so I'm done, and
Well, thank you.
you're very welcome. Thank you for coming.